My name is Cheryl Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of Tech Valley Center of Gravity. We are a makerspace, prototyping center, manufacturing incubator, and STEAM education center located in historic downtown Troy. Before we get into today's program, I would like to introduce our incubator director, Dan Falkenstrom, to tell you more about our state certified 16B manufacturing incubator, supported by Empire State Development's Division of Science, Technology, and Innovation, also known as NISTAR. Dan?
Thank you very much. So my name is Dan Falkenstrom, the Facilities and Incubator Director here at the Center of Gravity. So while our makerspace provides anyone access to workspace and tools, our incubator helps provide coaching and support to hardware-based startups. So whether you're working on a prototype for market research or considering different manufacturing options, maybe you're dealing with contract manufacturers for the first time, our incubator program will help connect you with experts, what we call engineers in residence, and also our advisory team, which will kind of help guide you through the manufacturing process. There's a lot of different steps. There's a lot of things to getting something from a prototype to something on a shelf. So we will try to help train you and coach you, point you in the right direction so you don't make some major mistakes ahead of time. And I will post some information about the incubator in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email and I will post that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. So just some housekeeping. We ask you to keep your microphone on mute. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A, and we will ask my questions in the order they are received. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today. This is Michael Tucker from Tucker Strategies. You may recognize him as a previous presenter. He joined us in December to discuss Packaging 101, and he kindly agreed to come back and talk with us about sustainable materials. Mike is a former VP of Sales and Engineering at Sonoco Plastics, a global packaging solutions leader. During his 32 years with Sonoco, he developed sales channel and manufacturing operations in several countries and has worked with major brands such as SC Johnson, McDonald's, and Kraft. His current venture, Tucker Consulting, focuses on assisting businesses with plastic-related products and helping new business startups. So he will be pulling from his extensive knowledge of the packaging industry to present some considerations when designing plastic products for reuse and recycling. We'll touch on what materials are easiest to recycle, biodegradability, and what happens at recycling centers and landfills. Thank you for being with us today, Michael.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me again. It's a topic of great interest to me and a lot of people looking out there for more sustainable products and recycled products, et cetera. So we'll get started on that. So you really kind of went over my background. I just point out a couple of more recent things. I've been involved with, finding and developing post-consumer plastic strategies for a couple of plastic companies recently and currently, to try to help them, answer the need of using more recycled materials and having a more sustainable operation. Many large companies are now doing sustainability reports, and if you're interested in what a company's doing, you can go on their website, and often they'll post their sustainability reports, which are, I think, driving a lot of good behavior and a lot of change that is positive for our country and the world. Also, I put on the bottom of this some of the things I'm working on now, other projects like a pool safety system and cannabis thing, a filter system. Also working heavily on reshoring things back to the US as companies find that the supply chains from Asia and other places are problematic. And I always like to point out the Commerce Department says that for every dollar we spend on a US manufactured good, it puts $7 into our US economy. So I think that's obviously very important that we remember that. So it's just not just the dollar we spend, it's multiplied by all the people involved in that supply chain. So what is a sustainable product? I had to go actually, I thought I knew what it was, but I wanted to get the exact definition, and this is what I got out on the internet. So it's a product that provides environmental, social, and economic benefits while protecting public health and the environment over the whole life cycle, from extraction of the raw materials until final disposal. Some people use a process called life cycle analysis to determine this impact, but it's really important to think about a sustainable product holistically in the whole process, from the materials, where they come from, all the way through the disposal process. And yeah, I put on this part on the bottom is what I added. There's lots of environmental claims about products. It's a very popular thing to do for marketing folks, and it's caused a lot of confusion, lawsuits, and a lot of legislations come out. And so we're going to get into that a little bit in the beginning here, so you kind of understand what the lay of the land is when you're doing products that are sustainable, and what you can say and what you can't say. Okay, so kind of the agreed upon definitions are green products are a product designed and manufactured in a way that minimizes the adverse environmental impacts involved in production, distribution, and consumption. That's pretty straightforward. A environmentally friendly product is a product designed and operated in a way that does not harm the environment. And that's fairly easy to grasp. And a biodegradable product, this is a tougher one, is a product that decays naturally in a way that is not harmful to the environment. So we'll get into that in a little more detail. And that's probably the most problematic claim. And you'll understand a little bit more about why that is in a few minutes. So these are the most dubious environmental claims. Chemical free. I mean, that's kind of like, how can something be totally free of chemicals? Everything is involved with chemicals. So I think, that's a very problematic claim. Earth friendly, that is an impossible to prove claim. Non-toxic, well, hopefully the things we eat and drink and consume are non-toxic, but is that really a meaningful statement? Certified green can actually be okay if you have a third-party certification. But you better have that, because if you say something's certified green and you don't, that's a problem. Natural, the same sort of thing. Anything that's natural, that implies it's positive, but of course, a good example is tobacco is grown, and it can be a very natural product, but it's obviously in many cases not good for us. Bio is another problematic word to use. Eco is another one. So when you get to these sustainable product standards, they're voluntary standards. Our government doesn't have, and around the world, there isn't a standard for a sustainable claim. So these standards are known as voluntary sustainable standards, and they're private standards to meet specific economic, social, and environmental metrics. And so in the center there, you have this balance of society, the economy, and the environment, and you have this idea of sustainable products. So this list on the slide now are the private organizations that actually set standards and some of them do assessments for sustainable products. And of course, this is problematic because there's so many, and this is not even a complete list. This is just some of the major ones. So when you get into this, this area of environmental claims, you can have things certified in some cases or work to a certain standard, but it may or may not be, probably won't be approved or recognized by other people, other organizations. So you want to be very careful about this and make sure that if you do make a claim, one of these organizations or another certifies it, but then recognize that it may not be accepted by other organizations. And the bottom line is these groups are doing good things, but they're also in competition with each other to get the revenue streams from doing this. So until this kind of vets out into like a UL type situation or a government rating system that has complete standards for everything, it's really a wide variety of people out there, setting standards. So the standards are all over the place right now. So it makes it tough when you want to make claims. This is something that I thought was very interesting. We talked about those claims before that were false and misleading. Well, greenwashing is a marketing process of conveying a false impression. So you may not actually make a absolute fraudulent claim, for example, but you're implying and giving this false impression about the products being environmentally sound. And greenwashing can and oftentimes is a violation of law. So why this is important is you want to make sure you're not doing that. Again, making sure the claims that you make are legal and are backed up by a third party if you want to do that. And you don't want to be the target of being accused of being making something that's greenwashed. Now, law firms are actually searching for these opportunities to sue companies because some states have penalties that are multiples of the actual violation. They can cause your products to be taken off the shelves, recalled. There can be huge fines for this. So obviously you want to be very careful anytime you're making any kind of environmental claim. That's why we're not seeing the level of claims even that we saw a few years ago, where people were making kind of wild claims about their products. We're actually seeing less of that now because of this, which is a good thing because we want those claims to be legitimate, but we also don't want to get sued. And in some cases, I think they're just looking for when people make an honest mistake. So I want to make sure that you know the rules of the road today, so you're not involved in that kind of situation. Okay, so the FTC, the U.S. Fair Trade Commission, they have, and in quotes here are their exact words, and this is what they say about their guidelines on environmental claims. Marketers should not make broad and qualified general environmental claims like green or eco-friendly. Broad claims are difficult to substantiate, if not impossible. Just what we've been talking about. Marketers should not make broad and qualified general environmental claims about green or eco-friendly. Broad claims are, again, difficult to substantiate. General claims should be about specific benefits, and qualifications for any claim should be clear, prominent, and specific. So let's attack one of the big ones here, biodegradable or degradable, using either word. And again, the exact quote is in parens. Marketers may make unqualified degradable claims only if they can prove the entire product or package will completely break down and return to nature within a reasonable period of time. And that reasonable period of time, this was disputed for years, is now fairly recently, they decided 1 year. And this is very important to know. So you can say it's biodegradable if it degrades in 1 year, but if it's destined, typical of most packaging and most products, to go to a landfill or incinerator or recycling facility, these items are not, they're not going to degrade in a year. So you cannot claim something's biodegradable if it's headed to a landfill. So that's very important to know. So you've got a paper product that is obviously biodegradable, but you cannot claim it's biodegradable if it's headed to a landfill because it won't degrade in a year. Now, how do we know that? There was great research done by Dr. William Ratche at University of Arizona, and he published a book called Rubbish, and his PhD students and grad students at the university, actually, he's an archaeologist, dug up landfills in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and they uncovered items that were in perfect condition. For example, this 1964 newspaper that it was announcing the news that John F. Kennedy was shot was in excellent condition. So our landfills are not designed to have things degrade. They're designed specifically to protect our water supply, because prior to the Clean Water Acts in the 60s, there was problems with water getting contaminated by the seepage from garbage. So on the next slide, I'll show you what goes on. This was a layout of the Hartford, Connecticut landfill. So the groundwater, you can see, of course, in blue at the bottom. And, that's obviously what all these laws around landfills were designed to protect. So they're protecting that blue water system down there. And so what they do is they put a layer of waterproof clay, oftentimes a layer of polyethylene plastic in that. And then the waste is in the gray, and they have vents for the methane gas that's created with a little bit of degradation goes on. Then they put another layer on top of the landfill of plastic. The geomembrane is typically a polyethylene plastic, and then a protective sand or soil compacted on top, and then they put vegetation on top. So, and the reason they put the plastic on top is so rainwater doesn't seep in and wash this residue from the garbage into our water system through lakes and rivers. So they're trying to keep it out of the groundwater that's underneath, and they're also trying to keep it in wastewater runoff. And so that's why nothing degrades really in a landfill. And a lot of people are always surprised by that because they assume that things degrade. And again, there's a little bit of degradation from the methane. When I've talked to landfill operators, that's mostly from the food items that we have in our homes that we throw away in the garbage, that like waste lettuce and waste food. It's not from the other items in the landfill. Another FTC guideline is about recyclable, and that's another claim that can be a little bit problematic. It's not quite as problematic as biodegradable, but if a recycling facility for the product is not available in at least 60% of the communities, a marketer has to say this product may not be recycled in your area. And the surprising thing is that some things that traditionally have been considered very recyclable and from my engineering standpoint are very recyclable, like glass, are actually not available to be recycled everywhere. So again, you have to be a little bit careful with that. There are some products that have broad recycling that are considered recyclable, and I mentioned those before: paper, cardboard, metals like steel and aluminum, and 3 plastics really: PET, polypropylene, and high density polyethylene and polyethylene. Those numbers, materials 1, 2, and 5 are considered recyclable because more than 60% of the communities recycle those. Other materials, we'll talk about them in a minute, and I'll give you those numbers, are not. Materials that you want, and actually, you know, being in the plastics industry for a lot of my career, there was a lot of people claiming products like ABS and polystyrene were recyclable, nylon, etc. And those, again, those products are recyclable, like in our factories where we can regrind it, remelt it, but it's not available in 60% of those communities out there. So depending on what plastic you use, you have to abide by this rule, and you can't claim it's recyclable. And it's frustrating because, believe me, the people in those industries, this is affecting their sales, and they're pushing to get their materials recycled because they are, in fact, technically recyclable. It's just not broad enough out there. Line bags and flexible pouches, if you see something that is a paper bag with a plastic liner, it's not recyclable. There's no magic in the recycling stream. I've visited many recycling facilities, including curbside facilities. My previous employer, Sonoco, used to run some of those. Plus, I actually ran a recycling plant myself. And laminated products are generally not recyclable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Mixed products like composite cans, these are like a Pringles can with, believe it or not, it has a recycled paper inside with an aluminum liner, which is the silver part you see when you open the can. And then the outside is a virgin paper that's got the nice graphics on it. And of course, it has a metal end on one end, a foil aluminum end on the other, and then a plastic overcap. So pretty complicated product. It does a great job for what it does, but it is not recyclable. So in case you want to know more details about these environmental claims, the FTC has a really nice website. I've left the location there for you. And you can also find that by just typing in Google FTC Green Guide. So the bottom line on these claims is you need to be extremely careful when you make a claim. And you really need to do it per the legal definition, and then if possible, have it certified. And then I would really be reluctant to claim anything's biodegradable. That's up to you, but I would just be very cautious on any project you're working on. And when you're a consumer looking at products, I'm always, wondering what they're really doing when they make some of these claims. So let's get to the important part about how we make more sustainable products. So in the center here, that's our goal, is sustainable products. And I'm going to go around the circle counterclockwise. You know, is the product healthy for consumers? Of course, that's a concern for product safety and those types of things. Are we using a material that's safe? Are there any things emitted from the product that will come off the product in use? Is the product environmentally viable, or sorry, economically viable? Is it cost effective? If we make, for example, a water bottle that would be, for example, disposable or even reusable, but it cost $100, you know, that wouldn't be very viable. So that's really not sustainable if we have to make something so expensive that the consumer can't afford it. Is it environmentally sound? You know, the materials that we're using, the recycling process, et cetera. Is the product process safe for workers? One thing that's really neat about the whole movement of sustainable companies and products is they're really looking at the workforce and what they're doing. And we'll talk about a sustainability audit at the end. And also the community is involved on the upper right corner there in purple. Does the production of this product benefit the community? One thing that's very interesting is I looked up, working on this presentation, the average wage of a production employee, a manufacturing employee in the United States, and it's $26 an hour. So you can, you know, forget the minimum wage with manufacturing. The average is already $26, and of course, many companies are way above that. So definitely a benefit in that regard, because manufacturing wages are always average higher than service sector wages. So designing for sustainability. The first thing, and one of the most powerful things we can do with any product, whether it's a packaging product or not, is reducing materials that go into the product. A lot of people call that lightweighting in packaging, but it's for any product that you're manufacturing. Unless the weight of the product has an internal benefit and the product has to be a certain weight, it's much better to lightweight. Even in the case of like automobiles, a lighter car is naturally going to get better fuel mileage, there's less inputs into it, etc., than a heavier one. So less input energy to go into those materials, less energy to transport those input materials, less energy to transport the finished product because it's lighter, less material to recycle and dispose at end of life. So lightweighting has been a very powerful tool in sustainability efforts, but the product still has to function and not fail, because if the product fails, then you're not making a sustainable product. And I put a picture of a Aquafina water bottle there because if you remember back just a few years ago, water bottles, and there's way too many that are disposed of, and not enough water is deployed with reusable containers. Certainly we can do better as a society and as a world, but water bottles are a good example of lightweighting. A few years ago, they were pretty heavy and you could pick them up, and if you squeezed them, they were pretty resistant to that. But now, once you open them, it's hard to hold them without having the water fly out the top if it's full because they're so thin. And that's been technological advances in blow molding that has enabled that. So their weight is about half what it was when they were introduced. So just a good example of technical good example of lightweighting. Reducing transportation of incoming materials and outgoing shipments. Energy used for transportation can have a huge impact on sustainability. If we're buying things that are 10,000 miles away, there's a lot of transportation energy used to get that product to our factory, and then more transportation to the consumer. If we focus just on the cost, the purchase price, and ignore the true environmental cost of importing materials from distant places, we're really missing that opportunity to improve the sustainability of the product. A lot of people just think about the sustainability once the product's made. Well, this is a big impact when you're transporting something, thousands and thousands of miles. And usually it goes from a truck to the seaport. And then even if it's shipped by sea, then it comes across here and then it's unloaded on a truck and then brought to our manufacturing location somewhere. And one of the methods that you can use to reduce energy input and improve sustainability is to ship things by train, or for example, truck versus an individual parcel shipment. So a train, for example, uses way less energy than a truck. For example, if we go to the West Coast with truckloads of product, we can do that much less expensively. It takes longer to put it on a train and then have that. We can actually take that very trailer, load it up, put it on a train, send that truck trailer to California. I've done this before. And then you can have it on, the truck's just set on the ground, the trailer, and then another cab comes by, picks it up. That's about a third the energy to drive a truck cross country. So a lot of people can take advantage of that if there's time to do that and it's planned well. So great opportunity to reduce the energy. Also, using a truck versus an individual like shipment. Like, well, kind of like what Amazon has created in some respects. They've done a lot of great things, but one thing is, second day delivery has become a crutch for a lot of people. And do we really need to air freight everything that we air freight? That's the most inefficient way to do things. And do we need 2-day and next day delivery for everything we buy? So even though it may not cost us anything if we're an Amazon Prime member, do we really need 2-day delivery? Many times that's an air freight shipment, and that would be a lot more sustainable if we waited for the regular, delivery process to go through. Obviously, sometimes it's necessary, but there's been a tremendous increase in air freight because of that. So again, when you're looking at sustainability, not being judgmental, but this is a big part of making things more sustainable. Using recycled materials. Well, it's very interesting. The energy savings per the EPA for using recycled materials varies by material, but with aluminum, which is a very high and pretty easily recycled product, like those aluminum cans in the picture, saves 95% of the energy used to make a new aluminum can. So a great product to use and also highly recycled. And you can, of course, use recycled aluminum many times. Glass, which is getting less and less recyclable because it's used less and less, and some municipalities have given it up, but it saves 70% on energy. Steel cans, which are easily separated in a single stream because they're magnetic, is 60% savings. Paper, 40%. And then plastic, 33%, a little bit less than paper. But if you're designing a product, whether it's a packaging product or a regular product, when you go into recycled materials, you've got to check on the strength of the product. The tensile strengths on a lot of these materials that are recycled is less. The impact strength can be less. Your color options start to change. Sometimes you can't get the colors you want, especially bright colors or some of the more modern colors that people like. You just can't do in recycled materials. The grades that you can get aren't as precise. So if you want a very specific performance, you may not be able to get it in a recycled material. And all of these things can be impacted, usually are impacted by using recycled materials. Now, obviously, the percent of the recycled material counts. I didn't put it on the slide, but if you're at 5 or 10% recycled content, there's not much of an impact on performance. When you start getting above that, it starts to gradually impact depending on the material. And when you get into high percentage recycled content, 50% or above, the impact is more significant. And there are some products that you cannot make out of recycled materials. The best example is like a lot of these products for the medical industry and food packaging. You cannot simply make them out of recycled materials. If it's food content, there are certain recycled materials that can be food contact, but you have to be very careful with that. Or you can introduce a situation where you could have a recall. And then in the medical world, they're simply not allowed to use for medical products. So recycling, paper, steel, and aluminum, as I mentioned, available nationwide. Glass and wood, available in some areas. Plastics, PET bottles is the #1 recycled material. Polyethylene, as I mentioned, polypropylene, and most others are recyclable, again, technically, but not available 60% everywhere. Compostable and biodegradable materials, that's starting. Vermont has actually started a composting process that they're actually getting the universities like University of Vermont and others to do, and they're getting their consumers to have a special curbside container for compostables, and they're starting to push that very hard. Some municipalities are also trying to keep those compostables out of the landfill and setting that up. Much of that is done now with yard waste in a lot of municipalities now, and it's not going in the landfill. It's actually being recycled into mulch or into other things. Material selection. Okay, when you get into material selection, that has a big impact on sustainability because you got this strength versus weight situation. So plastic film, when I was involved in that business, a prime polyethylene film, 100% virgin film, at 12 micron could easily hold 12 to 15 pounds. When we went into recycled polyethylene, we had to more than double the thickness of the product, our product, the film, to hold the same weight. So not a good trade-off when you double the material input to create the same performance. That's really not a good strategy for sustainability because we're doubling the amount of product we're creating to do the same job. So even if we used a recycled material, I would argue that that's not a very good solution if we have to make the weight so high. Depending on the product, it can be even worse than this. So just because something's recycled material doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. It depends on the performance of what it could be with other alternatives. And a good example would be to put a blend. In this case, you could maybe do a blend, which we used to do, of maybe 10% or 15% recycled content, and then the performance could be the same. That would probably, at the end of the day, be a better solution. Now, plastic lumber is the opposite story. Trex, who pioneered the using recycled plastics into lumber, and they use mixed recycled material post-consumer, some of the toughest material to use out there, and works brilliantly. It's actually more expensive than treated lumber for decks and things that last longer than treated lumber. I would argue that plastic lumber probably has a less environmental impact, especially out of recycled material, which most of it is 100%, than normal lumber because it lasts so long and it's made out of recycled material. It can be 100% because it's naturally thick. The picture on the screen here shows where they've done an excellent job creating voids in it so they could make it lighter. So they did that example like the water bottle. They made it lighter, but yet still does the job. It's really engineered to do both, make it lighter and make it more sustainable. So for heavy wall products, recycled materials are absolutely no brainer if you can meet the other requirements that are required. For example, if it can be used in the application and it's going to give you the color, and it won't do you any good if the product won't sell because you've got it in a color that consumers won't buy. The Association of Plastic Recyclers have a whole design guide on plastic designs for recycling and for sustainability. So I'm not going to go through that here, but you can get it online at APR Design Guide. You can Google that, or the link is right there on the presentation. And we can make this presentation available, of course. Okay, designing for sustainability. So one of the things that is real important when you design a product is to design it for long life and repair. One of the things that's occurred in our society over the last couple of 20, 30 years is that some products are designed for short life. A good example is appliances, which used to work regularly for 30 years and be repaired for even longer periods of time. Now, typical refrigerators designed for, 5 to 7 years. And that's a large device with lots of metal and plastic and motors and complicated as heck to recycle. And actually I have a example here on the bottom. LG solders a typical removable fuse, which this fuse here on the bottom is designed to be replaced. But they solder it on the circuit board so you can't replace it. Up at the top here, they show, I'm showing replaceable, the correct way to do that. So it's designed so when that fuse blows, you have to not replace the refrigerator, but you have to buy a $350 circuit board and then pay a technician, if you don't do it yourself, to replace it. That's not very sustainable because that could easily be, a power surge from lightning strike could blow that fuse, and then you could just pop in a dollar fuse and have it up and running instead of all this effort to repair it. Or in many cases, I think they're just replaced. So that's an example of not long life. The other example is an original iPhone from Apple, and now they, you can get your iPhone batteries replaced, and other phones you can get replaced. But some of the original products, electronic products, were not designed to have the batteries replaced, even though the manufacturers knew the batteries had a limited life. So thinking about designing for sustainability, you want to design things for long life and repair. Does that impact your revenue stream for replacements in the future? Yes. But if you're designing for sustainability, this is something you should think about. Is reuse packaging? When you get to the packaging side, the best packaging, if it's economic to return it and the supply chain is close enough, is a returnable package because you can use it over and over and over. In the case to the right here, this is a knockdown pallet, which eliminates the need for actually corrugated boxes, and it folds completely flat. And there's 324 when they're collapsed, and there's 144 when they're full in a truckload. And then just have to be wary. You wouldn't want to do this in the case of traveling too far because of the return freight, which you don't have with a disposable container. So you have to look at that supply chain, see where it's worth it. We did a bunch of this, and the auto industry is doing this pretty much 100%. All of the component parts that go into our cars are shipped in returnable containers, and a lot of them knock down or nest so they can be used over and over again, and they have a life of 10 plus years. So there's no packaging waste going on. And of course, the auto suppliers tend to be very close to the auto manufacturer, so it works out well for that. Another idea that we did with actually Kraft Foods and some others was a pass-through pallet. Many pallets at the end of their first use will be disposed of because the company that receives the pallet can't use it. The idea of a pass-through pallet is to use a pallet for your product or your packaging, whatever you're shipping, that your customer that you're shipping to can use. That way it continues on its life. And whether it's a plastic pallet or a wood pallet, that can be a great way to increase the sustainability, and it also lowers the cost. One time I had a very tough bid for some packaging, and it was down to the penny, and literally I convinced the customer that because we were using a pass-through pallet, there was no pallet cost to them, and they should give us credit for the pallets they didn't have to buy, and we won the contract because they thought that was great. And we actually used their pallet specification to package our products. And so that was a nice win-win. Sustainable packaging, minimize packaging, and consider the weight. Carton to size it. I pick it on Amazon, don't Amazon it. I mean, don't use a huge box and just use a bunch of packaging. This is kind of an example of something good. They've got airbags in there. Company named Cryovac or Sealed Air Cryovac invented that. Super light. It is plastic polyethylene film usually, but it's super lightweight, and you can puncture those, and then they take almost no room in a landfill versus the mountains of what we used to call the EPS peanuts that we used to get, or bunched paper. So always think about it. If it's in the right size carton, usually you don't need a lot of internal packaging. Paper tape and labels. A lot of people don't think about this, but plastic tape, which is extremely strong, but it interferes with paper recycling. The plastic doesn't recycle like the paper, so paper tape on paper boxes is a much better solution. Label construction, another thing people think about. I've seen many PET bottles with PVC labels and polypropylene caps. I mean, the PET bottle and the polypropylene cap actually in the recycle process, like you have at Ultra PET in Albany, gets separated, and all those polypropylene caps are recycled with the PET material, which is great. But the PVC label on those bottles is really a contaminant and reduces the value of that plastic stream. And by the way, Ultra PET in Albany is one of the best, most advanced PET bottle recyclers in the United States. Polypropylene bottles with a polypropylene cap and label, that's just absolutely awesome. Same with the polyethylene bottle with a polyethylene cap and label. A new thing that's going on by the label companies that are addressing sustainability is wash-off labels. These are labels that literally come right off the package. I know that some of you probably diligently trying to recycle are trying to remove labels before they go into the recycle stream, and they're sometimes nearly impossible to get off. Also, the glue can be a contaminant to the stream. So a wash-off label, they've designed the label to come off, not during the shipment of the package, but after its intended use. And direct printing on containers is a great solution. A lot of glass bottles, they can do that. And plastic bottles, you can do that too. And that, of course, eliminates the label altogether. Sometimes you can't get the graphics that you want, so that's why it's not done, but it's certainly more sustainable than, depending on the ink, but more sustainable than a label. And no paper labels on non-paper products. That's just a really bad practice to put paper labels on non-paper products. I mentioned QR codes here. This is one I got off the internet, so don't use it. I don't know what it goes to. And that's a great way to reduce like shipping manuals to your customers. Use a QR code to do a link to manuals online, and then people can look it up on their phone or on their iPad or whatever device they're using, and reduces that paper being shipped. Identify all the products in your product or your packaging. The ones on here on the left here are the 7 common ones for plastics, and then 74 is glass, 40 is metal or steel rather, and 41 is aluminum, and then paper just has the arrows. And you don't have to do that in some cases, like metal cans are identified with a magnet, but if you have the opportunity to identify your materials, that's a great thing to do. And all the codes are on the bottom of this Wikipedia list, and there's a whole long list of codes for all kinds of different products if you're interested in that. It's always a good practice to identify your products for recycling. So bottom line, no perfect material. Paper, #1 in the world for recycling, but the production of paper is energy intense. It uses a lot of air and water. You have air and water pollution from both the production and the recycling of it. A paper box, when it's broken down, is literally soaked in water they called it the beater room at Sonoco. It was beaten to a pulp. That's where that comes from, until it became back to fiber. And then the slurry was taken on porous mats, dried, and then made back into paper. So very, very intense, great process. Very proud of what my former employer did, but because they're very environmentally conscious and we're state of the art on pollution controls, but paper's not perfect. There's a lot of intense energy used to make it and recycle it. Aluminum and steel, very long life. I mean, steel products last, and aluminum products can last for years. They're good for reuse. They're commonly recycled, but in high energy consumption to produce and heavy. I mean, if all our packaging was made out of steel, for example, obviously it would be much heavier, and then you'd have the issue with the sustainable impact of the transportation, et cetera. Plastics, lightweight, clean, inexpensive, and a wide range of performance capabilities. You know, typical medical products that we see, you know, all the syringes, all the PPE, everything in the hospital, all medical devices, implant devices, the housings, all of that is plastics for a reason, because it's very, very safe. Of course, plastics, as we talked about, is not recyclable everywhere, not every type of plastic. And some materials in plastics are not considered recyclable at all. And that's a plastic pallet, which is becoming more and more popular now because these can very much outlive a wood pallet. And speaking of wood, of course, a great renewable resource, biodegradable. I can't say that in my marketing claim, but if, you know, trees do degrade in the woods, and wood that is discarded in the environment can degrade, but again, not in a landfill. But reuse crate right here. A lot of pallets will last a long time. A lot of energy to produce wood. In some cases, people claim more energy than to produce like plastic lumber. Heavy to transport. And the big issue with wood, like it's not allowed in the medical world because it's dirty. It emits little wood particles that can carry bacteria, and it's not allowed in clean rooms. And most food plants, wood pellets are not allowed, certainly not wood boxes, things like that. Glass, long life, good for reuse, and most places still recycle it, but it's very heavy, it's fragile, high energy to produce, melts at very high temperature, and it's high temperature to recycle it. You know, glass has gone away for like milk bottles because the weight, and also safety. Large glass bottles used to be common in grocery stores. Even 2 liters originally were produced in glass bottles, but if people dropped them on their foot, if they didn't break, they'd often break their foot, or if they shattered, they could cut their legs. So product safety really drove that industry, and cost to plastics. Mixed materials, laminations. I've got a foil bag here, and you know, that's a layer with plastic, aluminum, and sometimes paper in the inside with a plastic straw. You know, it has great value as far as like in Brazil and other parts of the world, and a little bit in the US, you can put products that need refrigeration in these laminations, like milk, and it doesn't have to be refrigerated. So it saves a lot of energy from not needing refrigeration, but at the same time, it's virtually impossible to recycle. So again, no perfect material. The lamination can provide great benefits, but it's completely going to the landfill. And there it's not going to degrade at all. So that's a problem. Other considerations, management of human resources, work-life balance, employee engagement, manufacturing plant. This is a picture of a very beautiful facility being built, the local water and air impact, community involvement, supplier sustainability. All of that is involved in. And this is the audit list for a sustainability audit. And I just went over some of that, and I'm running a little long, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. But it's basically looking at those facilities in total, their total impact on the environment, on the community, and on the people and in the community and that work there. And here's a couple of examples of bad examples of packaging. This product was not protected, obviously, was broken, and all the shipping, the input materials, and energy was all wasted. Terrible example. Another bad example, product was protected, but oh my gosh, you know, too big a box, a lot of energy wasted, too much packaging, ridiculous. And here's another one. This is one I really hate because they went through a lot of expense to make a over-the-counter product here, and then they put almost nothing in the box. That box is full from the supplier, that little tiny tab of, I think, 9 tabs right here. But tremendous waste of packaging. Product was protected, but a lot of material and energy wasted. And to me, the consumer, unless they read that package carefully, probably thought they got ripped off when they opened it. So in summary, we all have a big impact on sustainability. We should design things for long life if we want them to be sustainable and to be repaired. keep energy use in mind through the entire supply chain. Select commonly recycled materials and use recycled materials whenever possible. Consider the packaging and disposal. Can you use reuse packaging? Can you use pass-through packaging? Managing the manufacturing and HR practices of the plant are an important part if you're really working towards sustainability. And always review the entire supply chain. I didn't talk about your suppliers, but who you buy from matters. Are you buying from companies that are also doing sustainable practices? That's certainly the move toward the future, where suppliers have to prove that they're sustainable. I'm going to mention this real quick, ocean plastics, because it's a common question I get. I wanted to know, I'm not going to go through all the damage it does, because it's a terrible blight on our globe, and having plastics and other materials floating around. And so I wanted to find out where it was coming from. So there's a lot of good research by Our World in Data.org, a nonprofit. And they've been able to, of course, track where this material comes from, because some of it, you've got labels and things on it, you can find out. Well, 80% are from rivers that feed into the ocean, and 20% are from ocean going vessels, and are something to do with fishing or ocean going vessels. And Asia accounts for 81% of these inputs, and this rather small country of the Philippines is 36% of the amount of plastic going in. So why would that be? That's because in some parts of the world, the trash companies have to pay to dump things in a landfill, but they don't when they back their truck up to the ocean or a river and dump it in there. And that's what they're doing. In Africa, it's 8%. And North America here, actually was surprised it was so high, 4.5%, and that includes Mexico. So we need to do a better job here of keeping things out of rivers and out of our ocean. Some of this is, of course, related to the marine fishing industry, with especially fishing nets. But we need to do better work. And Europe obviously is doing the best job of all. You can look up more details on there, so I won't drag it on too much. So it's a global look at it. Look at everything that's has to do with your product and the packaging throughout. That's how to make it more sustainable. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Michael, we have, thank you very much for that. We have a bunch of questions in the chat, and I will just moderate them to you, and then and you can answer. So the first question is from Sam Wexler, and this goes back to the beginning of your presentation. What about naming a company something like Green Soap or Green Hats? He wonders if that could be a problem, and if there would have to be some green marketing claims in order for it to be debatable.
That's a really excellent question. If you could call it green, green hat company, but you would have to be very careful that you weren't greenwashing. You would have to, your name would be okay, but your statements around that name, you would have to do per the FTC regulations. That would be an easy target for a law firm to, sue you over if you were, in fact, going back to the greenwashing slide, implying, and benefits that weren't there. So I would be cautious. I wouldn't necessarily steer away from it, but I would be careful about any implication that you were greener than another company in your business. And the way I would do that is I would say something about what you're actually doing.
Well, quick question, Mike. So say I wanted to make a green hat company out of, say, 100% recycled plastic. Would that be, what do you think about that?
Again, you could do that. It's certainly a great approach, but I would say green hat company and then exactly what you're doing. And when I said recycled, I'd say where you're getting the material and just be clear about what you're doing. If you do that, then you've done nothing wrong. If you say, I'm using recycled material, for example, from there's two types of recycled material. We didn't get into it, but there's post-industrial and there's post-consumer, and there's actually two types of post-consumer, post-commercial and curbside. So I would be very clear about what exactly you're doing, and then I'd see no problem with it, but I would be careful.
Thank you. I had a question that I had popped in here. It was about when you were talking about the biodegradable distinction. Now, my question is really like, is that related to how the consumer interacts with the recycling stream post-purchase? If you're assuming that they're just going to throw it away, then it can't be biodegradable.
That's right. If your product is a consumer product and is going into our homes, the normal way a consumer disposes of something is to either throw it in their single stream recycling or to throw it in the garbage. And so you would have to presume that that's what it'd be. An exception to that would be if you, like HP, does an excellent job recycling their ink cartridges. In that case, they're providing a box. Like I think I actually have a Brother printer, and every time I buy a cartridge, I get a free label to ship the cartridge back completely to be refilled. Now they could make some pretty strong claims about that because they have disrupted that path to the landfill, and they're allowing me to ship it free back to them. So I don't know what percentage of Brother owners do that, but I would say that they would be able to make some pretty strong claims around that. I noticed that they don't, but in that case, if you provided another method for your product to be biodegraded, then you could potentially call it biodegradable. But biodegradable by far is the most difficult claim to manage. And that's why you see it used so little with consumer marketing. For a number of years, everyone claimed biodegradability. There's a lot of lawsuits about it, and most of those companies lost. So that's why I would be very cautious about biodegradability.
Okay. The next question is also from Sam, just asking why don't we have more recycling facilities? For example, for glass that you mentioned, does it have to do with energy consumption, emissions from smelting, something else?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Also, I wondered the same thing because, and this is the problem with, when I ran a recycling plant, it was really funny because we recycle polypropylene, and we had to do some work to get the customer's finished product off it. It was in South Carolina, and it was very valuable. And our cost we had to pay transportation. We got the product free, but we had to pay transportation to our plant, and we had to pay the processing for the equipment that we had and the labor. And by the time we got done, we had about 25 cents per pound in the product, but it was kind of ugly. It was typically had to be black or dark gray. And when prime materials were 50 cents, we could make money selling it for like 35 cents. But prime material went down to 30 cents. And all of a sudden we had something ugly that we had to pay. We had to charge 35 cents to make a return on the investment, and we went out of business. So the reason there isn't more recycling facilities is because it's very problematic to make money in that business. That's why, as a community, we need to better support recyclers, because their cost does not go up and down with oil. For example, with plastic, oil and natural gas goes up and down. The cost of plastic goes up and down. But if I'm recycling plastic, the only impact that has on me is transportation cost for diesel truck oil. Other than that, my cost is just labor and transportation and the sort of fixed cost of recycling it. The same with glass. Glass is very heavy. It's mainly impacted by transport, but it's not going to be impacted by the ups and downs of the glass industry. But I think what's really hurt glass is the conversion to plastic has been so strong that there's so little glass to recycle. And so it's hard to ship it very far because it's heavy. And that's what you find about recycling. It's a very regional business. You can only recycle materials a few hundred miles away. If you get more than 500 miles away from a recycling plant, then it's nearly impossible to do it cost effectively because the transportation cost is so high.
Thank you. Our next question is from Julianne from Fuse Hub. Can you address the concept that every so often you hear that recycling from a residential standpoint may be discontinued because there's no market for recycled materials? If that is true, would manufacturers be inclined to use less sustainable materials, or are they regulated to do this regardless if recycling is available to consumers?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. It's been a source of great frustration for me because what really destroyed the value of recycled materials was single stream recycling. Um, Before that, there was lots of separate bins. In fact, Vermont again does another great job of having consumers separate materials. For example, recycled materials like PET bottles, they're in Albany, Ultra PET. Those bottles have great value. That material, once it's reprocessed, can be worth 50 to 70 cents a pound. So to answer her question, those materials have great value when they're separated. When they're not separated, they have very low value. China was buying recycled material from the US in huge amounts because of our trade imbalance. A container to North Carolina right now, Wilmington, North Carolina from Shanghai is $7,500 one way from China to the US. The return container is $500 to ship from Wilmington back to China. So companies were filling up these empty ships with recycled materials. And it was cost effective for the Chinese to do it because I can't ship a truck from Wilmington, North Carolina to Albany for $500. So it's cheaper to ship it to Shanghai. So when they stopped picking up the municipalities like the ones in New York became dependent on this cheap recycling. And they didn't do the due diligence to keep that single stream clean and manageable. And now they're making efforts to do it. But it's problematic because consumers got in the habit of mixing all these recyclables together. So plastic materials in particular are very valuable when they're separated. When they're mixed together, there's some materials, like I mentioned, the PET bottles and the polypropylene caps naturally in the process separate because of their specific gravity weight, but other materials like the PVC labels do not. So when you mix plastics together, it has low value. When you separate it, it has high value. To go back to Vermont at their recycling centers, they make you separate everything. And they even separate their PET bottles from green and clear. Well, they're getting a huge amount of value. They're selling that material, and recyclers around the country are very anxious to get that material. That separation is not magic. It's very hard work, mostly manual. Even separating paper is difficult to do when you mix it all together. Years ago, we used to separate newspapers and corrugated boxes and fine paper. Well, the few magazines we all buy now, the glossy printed magazines have solvent-based inks. The newspapers that we used to get, some of us still get newspapers, that's very easy to recycle. And newspaper is made over and over in the newspaper. It's very valuable when it's separate. If you mixed fine printed solvent-based inks into it, it fouls up the recycle stream. So separation is the key to the value. And companies are aware of this, and everyone is trying to pick the top 3 materials I mentioned that are recyclable, and they're going more towards non-solvent-based inks. In fact, in the US, water-based inks are very, very prevalent, where ironically in Europe and a lot of places, they're still using petroleum-based inks. And so there's a lot we can do to make things more sustainable, but separating as consumers is a key thing. And our municipalities need to support that by setting up the infrastructure to accept those materials. But yes, those materials are very valuable, all of them, when they're separate.
Thank you. Next question is from Christy. I've been learning of plastic eating bacteria infused LDPE, which activates in a landfill, and a different one which activates in a marine environment. Do you have any thoughts on these?
Yeah, that's really some cool stuff going on. The original plastics that was invented was actually based on plant material when plastics was invented in Massachusetts. I forgot the year. So the industry had a long history with, biodegradable plastics, so to speak. The challenge is that those processes work in the laboratory environment, and you can make plastics compostable. And that regard, because composting has a legal definition and process that's defined. So that will work. The problem with these additives right now is they're not biodegradable except in a laboratory. Because of that same example, that newspaper you saw a picture of from 1964, a biodegradable plastic with those additives is going to be the same as that newspaper. It's not going to degrade. There's not enough moisture in that landfill, and there's not enough oxygen in that landfill for that to happen. Will it degrade in a landfill? Yes. I have customers ask me all the time, they want to use a biodegradable plastic. I tell them we can use those additives, but we can't make that biodegradable claim, because if we do, we could be subject to a lawsuit. So, and the other issue with those additives, and I think it's a wonderful thing that the technical people are doing to develop those, is they typically have a very negative impact on the strength of the product so far. Now, I think they'll get better, and I think down the road one day, all plastics will have those for inputs. I think it's especially good to do it for the plastics could end up in the ocean. But you have to remember back to that map. I know all of us on the phone have probably been to the beach a few times here in North America or elsewhere, and I've never seen somebody throw a bag of trash into the ocean. I'm sure that most of you have the same experience. So what's happened is, as a globe, we need to stop these trash compacting companies and trash companies from dumping this stuff in rivers that are ending up, again, 80% of our ocean waste shouldn't be there to start with. It would be great if it had a biodegradable additive that would work in the ocean, but why? We should get rid of it anyhow, not get it in the ocean to start with. That's the answer to me. I mean, absolutely down the road, I hope that all plastics has additives that will help them degrade. And they do, it does work, again, in the lab, but it's not the solution. I think that could be more beneficial faster by keeping it out of the ocean to start with.
Thank you, Mike. Next question is from Deirdre. Can you talk about bio-derived materials like mushroom leather, algal plastics, agricultural waste, et cetera, and how that fits into sustainable material use? Regarding ocean plastics, does this number from Asia include plastics that are exported to areas from other countries like the US and Europe by our recycling stream?
Those numbers, I don't know. I don't think they include that. I think they're just raw numbers. You'd have to go to that website and look. I don't think they define that. It's what they dump in the landfill. Most plastic packaging products are made in the country where the products are consumed. Like we don't import plastic packaging from China. As much as we import from China, basically all the packaging is made here because of the cost of transport. That's not true of every plastic product, but in the case of packaging, all the plastic bottles, for example, water bottles are made here. They're not imported. And the same with other countries. They're made in Europe and Asia, et cetera. To go back to I'm not an expert on the recycled material products that she was talking about. I have had some exposure to it. I would say it's extremely sustainable if you can make something out of a recycled material, especially agricultural waste. As we all know, I didn't put up the global warming numbers, but agriculture is a big impact on the situation we have with global warming. And, you know, there's a lot of effort there to improve that. But anytime you can use agricultural waste or any kind of waste for a product, that's a good thing. And I think also we have to get beyond sometimes all the legal claims and just think about what is the right thing to do. It's like I've got a client now and they don't want to use post-industrial recycled material because they can't claim it as post-consumer. Well, it's still a better thing to do. And I think I've got them convinced to start using it. But I think, you know, do the right thing, but that's certainly a great thing to do. If you can take things that are going to a landfill or to waste and make products out of them, that's the very best thing you can do.
Okay, our next question from Sam. Do you have a link or more info to the FTC regulations for greenwashing? Also asking for your email, but I'll make sure to forward your presentation if you share that with me to the group, so we'll have your email as well.
Yeah, the link for the FTC guidelines is in that presentation. You can also Google FTC guidelines. And I think they don't have a definition for greenwashing. I Googled that and that's how I got that definition. But there's a lot of information on greenwashing out there. And if they can't find it, they can email me and I'll go to the source that I had for them.
From Michael Lapsinger, you mentioned that packaging is not generally imported. What about the feed material, resins, etc.?
That's a good question. The U.S., because of low natural gas prices, we are a net exporter of all plastic resins. There's a few materials that come from Europe, but we're a net exporter. About 20% normal year of what we manufacture resin-wise is exported. We have lower resin costs than China and lower cost resin than Europe. And that's why we're a net exporter, especially out of Texas. And natural gas prices are half what they were 10 years ago. Quite frankly, it's because of fracking. And, so we're a net exporter. So there are a few materials that are imported that are special, but very few. There's a few materials in short supply right now because of the storms and the big freeze in Texas where the power outage happened that are being imported. But we're a net exporter, so not a lot of imports coming in from a resin standpoint.
Thank you. And our final question from Christy, does shredding envelopes with the thin plastic window or mixing these with whole paper recycling contaminate the shredded paper for recycling?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always take those out of tissue boxes and envelopes or cut them out. I also usually remove the glue on the tab part of the envelope because I was involved in paper recycling at one point, and all that glue and gunk goof up the paper recycling. And as a consumer, it's probably making a very little impact, but yes, those things are contaminants, especially the plastic window is a contaminant if you can imagine, if the paper recycling machine is like a giant mixer in our kitchen. Literally, it is a giant mixer. And when you put all that paper in there and you're washing it and heating it and beating it around with a beater similar to what we have in our kitchen, it breaks that paper up. And when the plastic gets in there, the plastic just floats around. The beater doesn't break the plastic up, so it becomes a contaminant to the paper recycling.
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any other questions? If you do, you can just unmute yourself and ask. If not, it is about 1:13 and we will just close up our presentation for the day.
Well, I hope it was helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you very much, Mike. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody again for joining us for Food for Thought number 9, sustainable materials. And I'm sure that we will have Mike Tucker back again very soon, and look out in your email for the presentation that he shared with us today.